reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Floods and landslides triggered by heavy rains in India's Himalayan region of Jammu and Kashmir have killed at least 30 people along a famous pilgrim's route, according to officials. The Kremlin says any meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian presidents must be well prepared, pushing back on the prospect of a peace summit between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky taking place anytime soon. China says it is unreasonable and unrealistic to demand its participation in nuclear disarmament talks with the United States and Russia after President Trump said denuclearization was a key goal in discussions with both Moscow and Beijing. Over 60% of French people want their parliament dissolved and new elections held. This, according to a new poll, as Prime Minister François Bayrou fights to save his minority government ahead of a no-confidence vote next month. And South Korea passes a bill banning the use of mobile phones and digital devices in classrooms nationwide, amid growing concern over the impact of heavy social media use on young people. Hello and welcome. Let's start with Nigeria. The country's oil sector is facing a double threat from both within and outside its borders. Starting with the external threat, international criminal gangs are looting Nigerian crude. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, the NNPC, has raised concerns about sophisticated international crude oil theft operations. The NNPC says that these gangs use security flaws and poor enforcement systems throughout Africa to loot billions of dollars in crude oil each year. Now, a recent crackdown by the Nigerian army highlights the gravity of the situation. Over 32,000 gallons of stolen petroleum supplies were collected, and 69 people were arrested in a single operation. The government's efforts to crack down on oil theft is constantly facing challenges. These include corruption within the oil industry and law enforcement agencies, infrastructure limitations, and rough terrain in oil-producing areas that hinders surveillance. While the NNPC is worried about external threats, Nigeria's ambitious Dangote refinery is facing threat from domestic oil mafia. The refinery is worth around $20 billion. It is the largest in Africa and is headed by Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote. Now, Dangote says that mafia, entrenched in Nigeria's long-standing petroleum importation system, is deliberately attempting to sabotage his refinery. This is because, for decades, these organizations have benefited from government subsidies on imported petroleum products. But Dangote refinery is changing it. Now, since commencing operations, the refinery has significantly disrupted the oil market and is even projected to end the decades-long gasoline trade from Europe to Africa. In the first ever trade reversal, the US exported more crude oil to Nigeria than it imported in February and March of 2024. This rising demand for oil was partly influenced by the Dangote refinery. As the refinery is set to eliminate Nigeria's need for imports, Dangote says that the oil mafia is funding resistance to the removal of petrol subsidies and attacking his facility. Dangote has even accused the NNPC for complicating the process of the refinery sourcing crude and accused it of being part of the country's oil mafia. The Dangote refinery is hailed as a game changer for Nigeria's energy sector. Dangote says that the refinery is the most daring project of his career, and he has vowed to win the fight against the oil mafia. With international criminal gangs on one hand and the domestic oil mafia on the other, corruption, insufficient infrastructure and resistance to change continue to threaten Nigeria's oil ambitions. And for more on this, we have with us Dr. Alex Vines, who's a director at the Africa Programme, Chatham House, joining us live from London in the United Kingdom. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, Doctor, how are the international criminal networks able to bypass Nigeria's security and monitoring systems to loot crude oil at such a scale? And what does this reveal about the vulnerabilities in the country's oil supply chain?
Well, this is a long-standing problem for Nigeria. My own organization produced a report in 2013 outlining the scale of the oil theft and the corruption in Nigeria related to this industry. And to be honest, for over a decade, nothing really much improved. It is a game changer, the creation of the Dangote refinery. And finally, because money is as tight as it is in Nigeria, the Nigerian authorities are professionalizing their security forces and trying to crack down on oil theft. It is a transnational, massive business. The oil from Nigeria that is stolen, so it doesn't even stay in Nigeria, it goes to regional refineries or international ones. We've got evidence of Nigerian stolen crude ending up in countries like Venezuela, like Spain, and
Sure.
in Asia too, countries like South Korea. So it is a truly global business.
Right. And Aliko Dangote's refinery was expected to transform Nigeria's oil sector. Yes, he faces stiff resistance from what is being described as a domestic oil mafia. Who makes up this entrenched group, and what interests are at stake in preventing the refinery from succeeding?
Unfortunately, Nigeria is incredibly dependent on money from oil, and so it is the lifeblood of politics in Nigeria. And so you have deep vested political interests related to oil. And so cleaning this up, rationalizing this industry is incredibly difficult. And so you've got the refining import mafias that you're talking about, and you've also got the criminal groups in the delta areas of Nigeria and beyond that are stealing the oil and putting it onto international markets. And particularly the kind of the theft of oil is also influenced by the oil price. So sometimes when the oil price is really low, you find that actually piracy off the Nigerian waters increases, and you have abduction of seafarers and attacks on ships. Whereas when the oil price is high, it's much more attractive to steal the oil from pipelines in Nigeria and then kind of export them to regional and international refineries. So this is complicated stuff. There is progress being made, A, in terms of the Dangote refinery, but B, the theft of oil seems to be declining in Nigeria because of action by the government. Indeed, just yesterday, the head of the NNPC that the state oil company was saying that they had really cracked down up to almost 100%, he thinks, of oil theft. Now, I think that's an exaggeration, but the figures of oil exports from Nigeria do
Sure.
show improvement. They're up from 1.5 million barrels a day to 1.8. And there is a sense that they could go up to what is probably the total production of Nigeria at the moment, which is about 2 million barrels a day. I don't believe the figure that Nigeria can anytime soon
Right.
reach 3 million barrels a day in exports.
And just going back slightly, given the dual threats of global theft syndicates and, of course, those domestic vested interests, in your view, what reforms or structural changes are most urgent for Nigeria to protect its oil industry? And how realistic are these changes considering the country's history of corruption and the weak infrastructure? You have noted that there has been a slight reduction, though, in theft.
Yeah, so improving the security forces, giving them the incentives to be professional, the equipment, which they now do have. They have good modern naval platforms. Nigeria actually has an industrial complex that can build offshore patrol vessels. They are using the new drones. They've got something called Deep Blue, which is fast patrol vessels. So technology is certainly helping Nigerian security forces crack down on this. But at the end of the day, the solution is political will. The kingpins of this are politicians. And so having to hold them to account, I think, is the way of really resolving this. Particularly both sides of the coin. The refining side of the coin, but also the illegal theft of oil side of the coin.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you for inviting me.
Our next story is about the tit-for-tat visa battles. As Western nations tighten visa rules, African nations are striking back with reciprocal restrictions. And Niger is the latest to join the list. The junta-led Niger will now make getting a visa for the country harder for Europeans by restricting visa application centres. Why? Because it has become increasingly difficult for Nigerians to obtain visas for the Schengen free movement area. Until recently, Nigerians could get their Schengen visas from France's consulate in the capital of Niamey, but France has suspended the consular services after the junta came to power, so Niger's citizens are now forced to travel to neighboring countries to complete the Schengen visa process. Niger says it formally requested that the European embassies still present in Niamey be authorized to issue visas locally, but received no response. So Niger has taken action. From now, only specific Niger embassies will issue visas for nationals of certain European countries. Embassies of Niger in Geneva, Ankara and Moscow are the only ones authorized to issue entry visas for nationals of Italy, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium and the United Kingdom. Now, these visa difficulties for Nigerians emerged after relations with France collapsed following the 2023 coup. Since then, the military government has strengthened ties with Russia, Turkey, Iran and China and expelled French troops as well as the French ambassador. Now, since France had already suspended consular services in Niamey, it was not included in this round of restrictions. The target is other European countries that still have embassies in Niger but refuse to issue Schengen visas locally. And Niger is not alone. In June this year, Chad suspended visa issuance to US citizens. It was a direct response to the US travel ban on Chadians. In April, Namibia moved to require visas for nationals of non-reciprocating countries, including the US, the UK, Canada and Germany. And last year, Senegal floated a similar plan to introduce visas for nationals of countries that impose restrictions on Senegalese citizens. So while Western nations continue to tighten visa rules, African countries are no longer just accepting it. Governments are turning to reciprocity as a tool of diplomacy. It's a clear message. If Africans face hurdles abroad, Western travellers will face them too. And as more nations consider this path, the global visa wars may only just be getting started. And for the next story, let's shift our focus to Botswana. The diamond-rich southern African country has declared a public health emergency. The country's supply chain has failed and hospitals have run out of medicines. President Duma Boko has made the announcement in a televised address on Monday.
By the powers vested in me by Section 17, subsection 1 of the Constitution of this Republic, I hereby declare a state of public health emergency, granting me the necessary powers to make decisions quickly to address the immediate medical needs of the nation.
He also announced over $18 million in emergency funding to restock clinics and hospitals. The president said that the military would oversee the drug distribution.
The purpose of the fund is to facilitate strategic procurement of healthcare supplies to adequately support the public health system's needs, to align procurement activities with the Ministry of Health's comprehensive plan to ensure timely delivery of medicines, consumables, hospital machinery, and spare parts.
Earlier this month, Botswana's health ministry warned that the system was severely strained with $75 million owed to private health facilities and suppliers. The ministry cited shortages of medicines for hypertension, cancer, diabetes, tuberculosis, asthma, mental and sexual health. Elective surgeries have also been postponed. Now, the diamond-rich African nation has relied heavily on mining to fuel its economy. Botswana's vast diamond reserves were discovered just after independence from Britain in 1966 and make up about 80% of the country's foreign earnings. But sales have weakened in recent years, pushing the cash-strapped government to suspend certain ministerial purchases last month. Depleted government coffers have triggered a public health crisis in Botswana, and steep cuts in U.S. aid have further exacerbated the situation. Before the Trump administration announced the cuts, the United States funded a third of Botswana's HIV response. Washington also provided $12 million through the Global Fund to fight malaria and tuberculosis. A downturn in the international diamond market and steep U.S. aid cuts under President Trump have hit Botswana hard. Most of the country's 2.5 million people are grappling with unemployment and high poverty rates, and now the country is reeling under a national health emergency. Now, before taking office, President Boko has said that his main focus would be to fix an economy too reliant on diamonds. But looking at the current state of affairs, it seems that Botswana has a long way to go before achieving this goal. And African nations are rejecting France's colonial legacy. Paris is losing its grip on the continent because of its brutal colonial history. France has been trying to address the past by returning colonial loot, but a clear and direct apology is still missing. France has returned 3 colonial-era human skulls to Madagascar after 128 years. The remains that are believed to include King Tura of the Sakalava ethnic group were handed over at a ceremony in Paris. They had been stored in Paris for decades at the National Museum of Natural History. France's culture minister called the handover a historic event, while her Madagascar counterpart described it as a significant moment for the Sakalava community and the nation.
Cette restitution This restitution of the 3 Sokolova skulls, including the one presumed to belong to King Tawera, from the collections of the National Museum of Natural History, marks a historic event between France and Madagascar.
Cette cérémonie symbolise aussi l'achèvement d'un processus à la fois historique.
Nous sommes effectivement réunis pour le retour.
We are indeed gathered for the return of our ancestors, these human remains, including those of our great, I would say great King Tawera. They are not a mere collector's item, they are the invisible and indelible link, Madam Minister, that unites our present to our past.
De collection. Elles sont le lien invisible, Madame la Ministre, et indélébile qui unit notre présent.
This marks the first restitution under a 2023 law, which facilitates the return of human remains from France's public collections. Earlier this year, Paris also unveiled a new bill aimed at speeding up the return of colonial-era artworks to their countries of origin. As per reports, around 90,000 African objects are still held in French collections. They were acquired through looting during colonial wars, through confiscations, coercive purchases, and so-called scientific expeditions that took objects without consent. Shortly after taking office in 2017, President Emmanuel Macron promised to facilitate the return of African cultural heritage within 5 years. So far, France has returned 26 royal treasures to Benin in 2021, including a throne, a sword belonging to 19th century leader Al-Hajj Omar Tol to Senegal, and a talking drum that was looted in 1916 to the Ivory Coast. And now 3 human skulls to Madagascar. But critics say this is not enough. African leaders and activists insist that returning looted objects must be accompanied by a formal apology and even reparations. And France has refused to do that. Macron has acknowledged French brutality in several countries. He has admitted to torture and killings in Algeria. He has recognized massacres in Madagascar in 1947. And more recently, violence in Cameroon during its struggle for independence. But in each case, he stopped short of a formal apology. France prefers words like regret, recognition, or responsibility, but never apology. Critics see this as dodging moral accountability and say that handing back loot is necessary, but it cannot erase a brutal colonial legacy. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to First Post.